I'm excited to be here and to be able to represent teachers. This is my first time, obviously, being to the Media Symposium because I'm usually in the classroom. And what's exciting about my year as Teacher of the Year is I get to see education from so many different perspectives and lenses. When we teach, we're kind of obviously caught up in our classroom, which we're supposed to be, and our schools. And so it's nice to be able to see the work that's being done behind the scenes and what we can do to make our voice heard more across and to be more valuable in the progression of education, because I think it's important. We have a lot of people, when I go around and I hear different conferences and people speaking, there's a lot of voices, but I like us to have a little more of the teachers say, and make sure that we do have our opinions, because you're in the trenches, we're on the ground, and we're the ones that are actually doing this. Everything you kind of speak about is kind of theoretical, and so here we are. Yes, I can tell you what it's like as a perspective from the teacher. And the good thing is I am excited about the moves that we're making. As a parent, I have 2 children, and as an educator, I feel like we are trying to raise the rigor and help our students become more globally competitive, and to help teachers get to that point. That's the struggle, because we definitely have to provide them that professional learning so that they can have the confidence to get there without all the stress. When I speak to my colleagues, the main thing they say is, the changes are being made, but they feel like they can see the difference with the students. They can see the conversations changing, the level of critical thinking, and helping their students to get to that level. So I teach in a Title I school. I'm in Houston County. I teach 4th and 5th grade. I have taught EIP, and I've also taught the gifted students. Our county has recently changed how we do our gifted classes. We used to do it where our gifted students, or who is identified as gifted, they would have a gifted class once a week, and they would go away, and the rest of the days they would be in a normal general education classroom. Well, recently we changed where we actually have ability grouped our gifted students, or high achievers, depending on the population of your gifted students, and we do it every day. And so the students that are not classified as gifted or met as high achieving on that rubric, they are not in that class. So I've done both ends of the spectrum. And I see both views on the effectiveness of having that, but I'm still learning and excited about my career in education, and happy to answer any questions if you have any from a teacher's perspective. I'm happy to answer them. Basically it. Anything from me? Thank you so much. Oh, just kidding. Yes, ma'am.
The Common Core.
Common Core. See, the most discrepancy I hear is from the higher ed, but in elementary Common Core, the only challenges we receive is from our parents. And this comes from a Title I school. A lot of my parents that I have, if our data we kind of look at, the ones that participate in our surveys, have perhaps a high school diploma. They don't have a lot of higher ed. A lot of our parents are single parents, or they're living in with their grandparents. And so the math that the grandparents have had is much different than what these children are experiencing. The math that we have now is much different than I had. The biggest challenge we have is that we're having to have parent nights. We have to educate our parents, usually once a month at least. I have parent nights where the parents come in and I am giving them tutorials on how I teach so that they can help their child learn. In 4th grade, we're doing different types of, instead of just doing basic algorithm math, for example, we're using a lattice model, or we're using partial product. And so just giving those terms out there so the parents feel confident in helping them, giving them practice tests with answer keys. Because a lot of the parents are saying, okay, I kind of get the process, but I don't know if I'm right in helping them. Teachers, I feel like K through 5, I feel like in my county, I feel like I'm prepared. I like the expectations. The struggle is that we were struggling to get our students to the expectations before the rigor was added. And so now we're saying, hey, now you were getting him here, 800 with CRCT was baseline. So now we want you to get a little bit higher, and there's a new test. And so there is a lot of stress. But I know that all of this is subject to change. And what we don't want is we don't want a gotcha. I believe the Department of Ed is listening, and the board is listening to the teachers, and they're saying, listen, this isn't a gotcha. We're here to support you. We just want to be able to have some type of longitudinal data system. We want to have something, the Common Core, that's cohesive around the county, of the states. I'm a military child, moved around a lot. It would have been nice to have something common. because I was either playing catch up or I was ahead. Usually I was playing catch up. Also because when you're military and you move around a lot, I was brought up in a single parent home with my mom, military, married my stepfather who's also military. There's times where we're traveling. Well, I don't know what you're doing. I could have been doing something if I would have known there was something common. And I know I'm just one of the many students, so that's just how it would have affected me. And then if teachers are transient and they're moving, they're able to also become more of a master on their standards. That's the biggest thing. We just want something to stick for a minute so that we can become a master and create lessons that work. Because even if we find a lesson that works for the student this year, next year it may not even be at all effective. But if I know that standard, it's easier for me to reach into my library of thoughts or go to Pinterest or different resources and say, okay, I need something else, let me try something else. But we have to have a foundation of standards. So I think the biggest thing is I'm excited about raising the level of critical thinking. I'm excited about strengthening our knowledge base with nonfiction. I like that with our students. Merely, this is Amanda Miliner speaking from K through 5, but I really like it for our transient students. Sir?
You mentioned the longitudinal data systems. Excuse me. Is it technologically easy enough to use, and does it have rich enough content to be useful in your school?
I feel like growth is being made there. At first, anything new is hard. There's a learning curve. We have had more professional development on that, so teachers are becoming more acclimated to using the system. Resources, there was lots in math. At ELA, we were still growing with science and social studies. So there's still some growth there. I think the conversation with teachers too, with letting the DOE know, hey, this is what we're needing, I believe we have been heard, because I have seen changes already being made. But in my county specifically, I think we're doing better with using it. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it's fair for teachers to be the evaluation just on the group of kids they get, not knowing how they came in, not really having a benchmark and growth, but I'm really curious to see how the evaluations are going to go, because you don't get to pick the students that you get to have. Mm-hmm. And if you don't hit student lottery that year and someone else gets it, is that a fair evaluation?
You know, it's such a good question. What is fair? I think the biggest thing, though, is we need to have teacher accountability. We need to have that. And I say that as an educator because we need to make sure that our student, and I say this as a parent, I want to make sure that my child's parent is accountable for what's happening. The thing with accountability with teachers, the students we get, I think we're trying the best we can to find a measure that is somewhat reliable and fair with using it where they're grouped with their similar sub-pops of populations. I don't know the perfect measurement of how you do that, but having it where they're with similar students, then you're not really saying the students that you get, they're compared with students that are like them. So that makes it as fair as you can possibly get. And then you're looking at the growth. It is hard because that's just the hard data. There's so much soft data that goes into what we do. And so I wish there was a way that you could look at a rubric and I could tell you what my student has gone through and how their parents are incarcerated, or they're in a single parent family, or they just had a death in the family, or I wish there was a way to measure that as well. That becomes so subjective and difficult to measure. But I think the way that we're going about it with trying to do like students, showing the growth in a multifaceted way by including surveys and including the data, I think we're going in the right direction. I don't know if it's the perfect direction or most fair, but I feel like I haven't heard a lot of complaints from teachers yet. I think they're saying it's different, let's try it out, let's see what the data says, and if changes need to be made, perhaps we make them.
Okay, quick follow-up. Fulton County is getting ready to do a compensation based on teacher performance.
Okay.
You get 0 to 4.5% raise depending on peaks. What do you think?
Are they also including the teachers' years of experience and degrees?
They are no longer, that is no longer a factor in.
Okay, so they're only going off of the growth. Are they going
They're
off?
gonna be where they are, and then from this point on.
Okay, so that will be interesting to see. I'm not for, and this is from Amanda Miliner, I'm not personally for merit pay. I think it causes too much of a competition, and we want our teachers to collaborate. We want them to work together. We want them to be able to say to their colleague, I know you're doing great things. We want them to say that out of genuine interest of, can you help me do great things? I don't want them to look at their colleague and say, oh, she's doing great things. It's because of this and this. So I want it to be a positive conversation. But I would like to see how the data plays out. Perhaps it works. Maybe everyone has growth and everyone gets paid more. Who knows? Maybe the competition would push them. I do like the idea of paying teachers for their education. I like the idea of helping teachers to reflect and want to get better. And the idea of having years of experience. There's so much that I learned from the veteran teachers before me. So I would be interested to find out how that is, but I do like when we pay the teachers for their experience and their knowledge base. Yes, sir? Now you're all asking questions. What's going on here? I thought I was getting out of this. Yes, sir.
Last one for me. There's a lot of talk about, QBE and charter districts and all that. It seems to me a lot of the flexibility discussion will involve class size changes. Do you feel like you're at the upper limit for class sizes? Can you handle more kids?
I'm not personally, but I speak, no, I'm not personally, I'm being honest. My school, I have about 22 to 24 students. That's what I have in my school. The gifted students, our classes were capped, so once you had your students in the beginning of the year, they couldn't add any more unless they were certified as gifted. So high achievers coming in, we couldn't be added. So the most I ever had was 25. When you're in the regular ed class, I still had probably 22 to 23. And we're a highly transient school, so there may be times when you had 24, and there may be times when you only had 20. I have heard conversations, though, about the class sizes, and there is a struggle with, are we making sure that all students are getting a fair education, and that's a different conversation. QBE, hello, I mean, I'm definitely, I followed it, but I won't act like I'm any type of master or expert in that area. All I can say is, funding, yes, we see this struggle. It's so unfortunate to see that some schools are not at a full calendar year. I feel for when Houston County did have furloughs. We had furloughs about 4 years ago, and that was scary to think. I was a newer teacher. How far the furloughs are going to go? Am I going to be affected? Are we going to be able to produce high-achieving students if we don't have this many days? How do you still get that level of expectation, but you only have 175 days? Every day counts. And as teachers, at this time right now in January, this is when the stress really starts for us. Because now it's like we don't want time to fly by. We want it to slow down, because we see that the test is coming. As a 4th and 5th grade teacher, I'm in one of the years where, we look at the data, and we know we're held accountable, especially when I taught 5th. And now everyone's held accountable, but before we had the longitudinal data system, the stress is there. In a perfect world, yes, it would be nice if my kids came to me with all the materials. It'd be great if they, weren't hungry, and if we had endless amounts of technology, but we work with what we have. So I haven't, the class size personally, I haven't had that. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel, speaking of testing, you just referenced that, how do you feel about the amount of testing in your classroom right now, the amount of test administration and test prep time, particularly because you teach younger students? Do you think it's appropriate? Do you think it's actually helping your students?
We have to have something. I mean, you have to analyze your data. So if we aren't using some type of summative or formative assessment, how do we know if we're doing well? I think testing is needed to some extent so that I can know on a standardized way how we're doing, because we use our norm-based testing as well, and so we want to be able to, when we think of NAEP, I want my kids to be prepared for that. Yes, there is a lot that does go into preparation, and I feel nervous for my colleagues right now of having to administer the milestones on the computer. Because in my school, a lot of my babies don't have computers, and they have iPhones, but I mean, goodness gracious, that's just scary. And because the texting language and the short answer responses, I know they're going to say like SHD for should. And so we do have to work with them on computer skills. And when they're typing, there is none of this, there's this. And if it's timed, well, then we're just palpitating because, you want to just say, move, tell me what you want me to write. Well, you can't do that, obviously. So yes, there's a lot of stress in, are they going to be prepared for technology? That is a real issue out there. I think those answers are going to be ironed out in due time. We do have computer times that we use, but they're with the added amount of rigor. What do we do? Do we want to do typing, or do I need you to come over here and work on this word problem one more time, just because I want? So it is difficult. I think testing is needed personally. I think it is. In the elementary level, we had CRCT, and then you would have some of your periodic benchmarks. I think we could probably lessen some of those benchmarks, maybe just do one to get them more familiarized with test taking. But I think you have to have something to gauge how they're doing. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
We've been doing stories lately about how fewer teachers are entering the profession, both in Georgia and nationally. And some of the teachers we talked to said that they really just feel like right now teachers are just getting beat up, that they're demoralized. I'm curious of what you think of that when you look at the profession, and do you have any message for lawmakers, for policymakers about the attacks that are lobbed at teachers when it comes to school reform?
Well, I think first of all we have to look at who chooses the people that are making the decisions. And teachers, we have to have a voice. We have to get more active and more involved. And I'm guilty of this myself. We get so consumed in teaching that we forget the walls, that how we can go beyond that and get more involved. I think that's one of the reasons why the Lord put me in this position, because I'm definitely not the best teacher. I'm young. I think it was for a personal lesson of, Amanda, are you doing everything you can for education as a whole and not just for your kids? And so I think teachers, we have to reflect and say, what else can I be doing? Maybe I need to get more involved. Talk to my representatives. Tell them what I'm thinking from a teacher's perspective, which could indeed change what we're doing. Be involved with the board and going to the board meetings as much as they can, or streaming online if possible, and looking at the notes. That's where we start. For newer teachers coming in, I think first and foremost, yeah, it's a rough profession. It has been. You can't go in this for the money per se, especially with the competition, but every job has pros and cons. So even if you go to another job, I can't sit at a desk. My husband's a contract specialist, loves it, he'll call me, and I'm like, how do you just sit there? I mean, I know he's working, footnote, don't write that. My husband works very hard. But I personally, that would be a huge con for me. The relationships I build with my kids, that's huge for me. That's one thing I missed this year with the sabbatical of traveling, is the relationships with not only my kids, but my colleagues. I mean, my colleague right now is like Joyce Meyer on my iPod while I'm driving or something. That's my colleague because I'm on the road so much. That's a con for me. So I think these younger people need to first kind of write the pros and cons of what's important for them and their jobs and what they're wanting. If you're looking at education for an easy job to just get a paycheck and have summers, well, then you do need to look somewhere else. If you're looking for a job where you can make a difference, there will be struggles, but you can see daily the effects that you're making in these children's lives, well, then teaching is a profession for you. And if you're not happy with how things are going, get involved and try to make some changes. Anything else? And now to the wonderful Matt Cardoso.
So if y'all need a teacher voice, then obviously Amanda's a good one. The good news for you is that I don't have any time to speak. So I'm Matt, and so if we haven't met face to face, then here I am. I'll be here through the rest of the day. Hopefully y'all know email, phone calls, those work well. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Dollinger, who will introduce our superintendent-elect.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Dollinger, President of Georgia Partnership. Sorry I wasn't able to be with you this morning, but I'm here now and am happy to be working with our staff to present you another Media Symposium. We try to provide you with resources, the written materials, obviously the new top 10, but live resources with the voices of people you see today. Matt mentioned using Amanda as a resource. We encourage you using all of these people as resources. Oftentimes when you call Bill Maddox, he will hook you up with Dana or me or both of us. We love to tag team conversations with you, and oftentimes that's to help explain issues. You know that we come in these issues from a nonpartisan perspective and from the research base, so we try to help you explain the issues, and sometimes you quote us and sometimes you don't. That's part of our relationship. And if we can't help you directly, then we'll refer you to someone. So a lot of those people to whom we would refer would be the folks you're meeting today. But Amanda is a good resource. We are blessed every year when the Georgia Superintendent of the Year is identified. They serve on our board for a year. So that gives us that voice, the Teacher of the Year. So we have another resource for you now. I'm happy to be able to introduce our new State Superintendent. Richard survived a long campaign, both primaries and then the election. Similar to Amanda, he comes from a military background. The bio's in your packet. He's got that teacher, administrator, and business owner background, but now he's got a much bigger arena. 500 to 600 employees and something like a $7 billion budget, and he has opportunities also to talk to reporters all across Georgia. Here's Richard Wood, our superintendent.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come out today and to speak. It's it's been a good month and a half now, really making the transition and looking forward to Monday. And as I kind of shared with people, it's been kind of like I've been riding the back of the seat of someone else's car, and I finally get to take the wheel come Monday and see what the car can do. But as your next state school superintendent, I am very optimistic. I think we have a lot of great opportunity in Georgia to be very successful, to make some very positive moves for our kids and our teachers, throughout the state. And I'm looking forward to that. I think as an individual, and kind of sharing, I'm not here to make excuses, but I do have expectations, and I think the expectations will be high. I think, it'll be something that we look forward to and look forward, as far as the next 4 years together and seeing what we can accomplish. And some of the things that I really wish to share with you a little bit, as far as giving you an overview of the way I see the landscape at this time and some things we'll work on throughout the next few years. I think, first of all, we have to have a period of collaboration. I think that for myself, since obtaining this, or winning the election, I've reached out to the governor's office, the members of the General Assembly, our educational partners, throughout the state, and I think we've had some good dialogue. We've had some good discussion. There's a lot of agreement that is out there, and I think that's what we need. We have to have that open pipeline that goes back and forth, and so that is something that we could look at. I think that looking at the relationship perhaps between the department and other agencies has been somewhat weak within the past several years, and so we're in the process of repairing relationships and building new relationships. Again, some people have even stated that, Richard, we've never had that relationship with a sitting superintendent, so I am looking forward to doing that. I'm fully committed to the strengthening of these critical partnerships, because if we do not work together, things will not get done. I mean, that is something that has to take place, and it has to take place throughout the state. And that means working with each and every individual that they are, our parents, our students, our local boards, our superintendents, teachers, and all the individuals that are involved with that. And so one of the things I hope to do, and again recently, or at least early on, is to have focus groups, to have town hall meetings throughout the state, to have listening sessions, so that we can hear and understand what is going on and make sure that we know, what the needs are. I think you heard about, listening to teachers and the resources and what they need. And that is something we are critical. It has to be looked at, because we are a service industry, and we have to make sure that our individuals that are out in the field have the very best materials and have everything they need to reach our kids. And so that is a commitment that we'll look at. For me, this mission and this, goal, as far as what I've looked at, that first of all, we have to be two things. We have to be child-focused, and we have to be classroom-centered. That's where we're going to make the difference. I mean, the difference is not going to come up in my office on the 20th floor. It does not come from a central office. It does not come, as a former administrator, from a principal's office. But it takes place, that learning takes place inside that classroom. And because that's where our kids are, that's where our teachers are. And so what we have to do is that we have to remove those educational barriers that we put between these two individuals. And so in doing that, what are some things we could look at? I think we've already talked about math. Math is something we have got to look at. We've got to get right. It has been one of our greatest challenges that we have had over the past several years. And one of the things I always kind of shared on the campaign trail, I said, math is something we've done for thousands of years, but we've kind of messed it up in a relatively short period of time. And so we've got to throw back some common sense stuff to that. Last month, when meeting with the board really as a guest, I saw that how many waivers were being submitted to the state board regarding students, who struggled with the integrated math approach, who had transferred outside of our, state. And so they had a tough area of transition. And that was one of the things, even on the campaign trail, I had somebody, or asked, people with math, I said, is it easy to really move from integrated to discrete and vice versa? And they said it was very hard. And so I think those are some things that we've got to look at and take under consideration. But I do appreciate the cooperation, the collaboration from both the governor's office, our state board, that have shown on this issue. And together we are going to allow our schools, I think this upcoming year we talked about, if we're going to have two separate offerings, discrete or integrated, we have to have two separate tests. And I think that's something that, we have to look at, because it is, to test something you have not learned on, is unfair to our students. It's unfair to our students and our teachers as well. So, we'll be looking at that, and I think that'll be something we'll have a very positive move on to give our local schools that flexibility, but they'll have the resource that will allow them to do that. I think also, of course, during the campaign, the issue of Common Core was something that was brought up from time to time, especially early on throughout the race itself. But it's something that we've been focused on, and my views are well known on the issue. And, but we're going to move forward. I think that, the governor and the board and myself are committed to make sure that our kids have the very best education system, the very best standards that allow our teachers to reach these children. And so we're going to do that, and we're going to continue to look at that. We're looking at some of the latest, information that's coming back. We've had a period of review. We're looking at the responses that have been, and there have been many, and we'll plan on posting those to make sure that we all have access to what, Georgians have said. And so I think that will be an ongoing dialogue that we will continue to work on and make sure and ensure that we have the very best. And because I have been consistent, with that, we're not saying we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, to say that, when you add 2 + 2, it will always be 4. And so, those are things we have to look at to make sure that as we move forward, we're going to be very measured, and we're not going to be irresponsible, and we're not going to be faddish. As an educator who was worked in the classroom, and we were always talked about as teachers that if you stood still long enough, the pendulum's going to come back and hit you in the back side of the head. And for me, that's not where I want to be. I'm not a fad person. I kind of look at it, I said the pet rock, was a fad. It was not a very good fad, but it was a fad. And so we want something that is meaningful, across our state. Science and social studies. These are standards, and of course, being a former social studies teacher, they will be Georgia-owned and Georgia-grown. There will be no doubt about that. We will control these standards within our state. We look forward to making sure that we have the very best with that. A lot of interest is, doing some things across the state that we look forward with that. One of the personal goals here is in providing each fifth grader with a pocket constitution, a pocket copy of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. One thing I've heard is that throughout the state is that our people and our young people need to know, about our founding fathers. They need to know about the Constitution. They need to know about government and how it works. And I think that, just as Amanda, I think you talked about being involved. Well, that's where we find out how we're involved, and I think we will do that very efficiently. One of the things that's very dear to my heart, is K-5 education. I am a foundationalist, and one of the things I understand fully is that our kids, if they are not proficient at reading by 3rd grade, the struggles and the obstacles that they will face in life will be exponential. And it is my goal to make Georgia the #1 literate state in our nation. I will not rest until we obtain that, because I do believe that if we can obtain that goal and that our kids can read and read proficiently, we will open up the doors of opportunity that they cannot even dream of. And that's because one of the things I found out as a social studies teacher, my kids knew content. The greatest issue they faced was reading and reading comprehension. And so I think that is very important. And again, as mentioned, I grew up as a military and within a military family. My mother made sure that I was reading all the time. And I think that played a very critical part in making sure that I was on grade level and was very successful, throughout my term. And again, with math, to have the critical proficiency of the 4 major skills by 5th grade, that will be a commitment as well. So we will look at those things. We will look at what I call really foundational standards to make sure that what we are teaching our children are the very best so that they are on grade level, they are proficient in those 2 areas. Now with graduation, excuse me, for many of our kids, academic success has not only been eroded by a weak foundation of fundamentals, but also a one-size-fits-all. One thing we have found out, and of course coming out of No Child Left Behind, we said that every child's going to college, and we have basically given them very prescriptive, course offering, and where we led them down one path. And I can tell you, not every child, is going to college. Not every child, has the same skill set. If they came to us, like pre-packaged Twinkies, our job would be easy. But I can assure you as a classroom teacher that sometimes what we found out is that some of the kids, whether they were coming to you from kindergarten or 12th grade, that you would think that some of the kids, they could build a Saturn V rocket, and some of these kids have never been out of diapers. That is the challenges we face, okay? That's just the reality, and that's why we have to be able to have the flexibility to personalize and not standardize the education process. Because we as teachers, and I think that for those teachers that I grew up, and especially as I moved across the state or across our great nation, was they were able to address the learning needs of me as an individual and to treat us as, our students as individuals. That's where we make the greatest change, because we have to have that flexibility to make those adjustments. And I think that also in conjunction with that, And I look forward to working with the state board as we expand, such concepts, allowing courses such as financial literacy and other CTAE or college tech and agriculture courses that count as core. And I think that's something, that we've looked at. We talked about, where computer science, is now going to be offered. But I think that, where accounting may count as one of those top math courses, to better align, especially as we look at career pathways, what are courses that actually make sense, that are better aligned with certain paths. And so I think those are some things we look at, not undercutting the child's education, because I believe that what we are doing, we're offering exploratory, we are giving them a chance. Because I can guarantee you that when I was growing up, being state school superintendent of Georgia did not hit my radar. But, if we provide a good foundation, we give those opportunities with that. And so I think that, as we look at that, with that, also offering a wide range of diploma seals, from career pathways to AP to honors course completion. This is something we can look at, but it gives our kids options. It gives them choice. And again, it allows us to better address, their learning needs as they go through our educational system. Testing is also something that we are looking at. Of course, you will hear a little bit more of that, I think, in following. But, not only are our students suffering from overemphasis on the test scores, but also our teachers. I think we must aggressively seek ways to lessen this burden, and I'm calling on the members of the General Assembly to explore ways to diminish the burden this burden, and we'll be working closely with the Department of Education to have the most effective diagnostic testing system we have. I think our tests do have to be diagnostic. One of the things I found out is that many of our tests in the past have always been what I call an autopsy report. Something you give at the end of the year, and then basically a lot of this information is put on the shelf and you never do anything. That's because the next year, teachers are so concerned about worrying about their standards that, they perhaps, we're assuming that every child is ready to go on day one. And we have to have that flexibility so they can take that information throughout the year and look at smaller increments, almost what I would say an educational physical throughout the year, so we can address those needs. And again, also in following up of that, or following up on my call for a moratorium while on the campaign trail, we did witness that the state board, acted very responsibly, and I do appreciate their work in that, in adopting a moratorium on student test scores in the teacher effectiveness calculation, and to use these scores and students and course grades. I think I look forward to working with them to continue and asking for another year to make sure we do this right. One of the things I have called is more of a slower, a more precise and more measured approach. I think one of the things we looked at throughout the past 4 years that we have basically thrown everything but the kitchen sink into the education system. And I think it's very hard to know what is working and what is not working, at the same time. And I think you've even heard examples of that, throughout the day when you make those changes. I think, the one you talked about with the new Milestones test. And then you actually have, computer testing on top of that. Well, if you have an adverse, effect on student scores, was it because they took the test on a computer, or was it because of the standards or the testing itself? And so we have to look about, what we were doing to make sure it is very measured. Teacher evaluation, we must also look at how we measure the effectiveness of our teachers. No doubt that every child deserves a quality teacher. They deserve the very best. And I think that, to offer them something less than that, is a disservice. And so we have to make sure we do that, but it has to be a very fair tool. I think, as you heard, teachers are not afraid of evaluation. They just want to make sure that the evaluation is fair. And I think that is just. That is all we ask. Good teachers, they are not concerned about evaluation. I assure you that their only concern is, can I close my door and can I teach? And so we have to make sure that we look at that and, across the board, and make sure it is very fair. Administrators are well. This is another group of people that are perhaps looked at, but they are struggling with the paperwork and demands and the time of the new evaluation tool. And again, their account is looking not, and our teachers are basically 50%, from the evaluation tool, but theirs goes up to 70%. Now that's a lot. That's a big difference when you start looking at that. So we have to look at some things, what we're doing. We must look into freeing up these administrators so they can focus on teachers and, entering the profession. I think our new teachers coming in, they need that support. We need to make sure that we just not throw them out to the wolves. And many times, again, as an educator, I saw that take place. They were always given the toughest classes, the toughest challenges, and probably had the less support. And so we need to make sure that our new teachers have that support so we can give them feedback. And the feedback we give is very meaningful. Funding, of course, is one of the things we'll look at. It's one of the greatest challenges we do face in education. I applaud the governor and the General Assembly for making the commitment, to look at this, to meet our constitutional obligation. Again, one of the things you find out, we are constitutionally obligated to fund, public education. And so I think that we'll look at that. We'll look at the QBE formula, something that is, really, it was outdated, the minute it was passed, because it's never been fully funded. That goes all the way back to roughly 1985. So this is something, this is not new that what we're experiencing. It's something that, has been ongoing since day one. And I think that, our state can, only keep our number one business ranking, by ensuring that we continue to move forward in the area of economic development. That's very important. And so I think that by, having a good, sound education system, we will do that. We will be, support the state, and again, aiding them, throughout, the years, and again, as we move forward in, an educational partnership with business as well. And then I think we look at communication. We must strengthen our partnerships with the governor, with the state board, with our teachers, our parents, our students, and educational groups. We also have to reach out to the business community as a whole. And that's one of the things I look at. One of the first things probably in February we'll begin rolling out will be a public awareness campaign, which will highlight all the initiatives that are taking place. The campaign will feature, a strong digital presence, including a website dedicated to telling the success stories. We talk about so much about the bad, but there are a lot of good things that are going on in Georgia. And so we need to make sure that we highlight those so that not only do we highlight with them, but we can share what's going on so that our peers and our communities can learn from each other. Too often we witness, perhaps the overemphasis on scandals and struggles of our schools instead of the success. But I think this needs to have some balance with that because there are a lot of good things going on. And with those school systems that are failing, instead of, penalizing all of our schools, all of our systems, let's be prescriptive. And we will address those things. And that's one of the things I do plan on doing. Probably one of the first, things you look at is that many of the schools that I will be in contact with will be those that struggle. Because if we have a struggling system, it paints or gives all of us a bad reputation. And so I think by doing that, we will try to put that emphasis that is out there, but we must have an effective communication system. Another component of communication is listening. And I'm committed to listening to all of our students and teachers and administrators, our parents, all of our educational partners and what they have to say. And that, in fact, is probably what I've been doing really, or spending most of my time on, is listening. And I think that's because if I listen and if I have the truth in front of me, I can make those changes. In concluding, I think, Georgia has a history of pulling together to meet the challenges. I think that is one thing that's very, very clear, that if we know that we are working on a just cause, then people are going to rally around that. There is no greater opportunity than the 1.7 million students and over 100,000 teachers who are in our classroom each and every day, with a collaborative effort, real communication, and the pursuit of classroom-centered and child-focused policies, we can realize the full potential within our great state. And I look forward to being our next state school superintendent. Again, as I said, I'm not here to make excuses, but I have expectations. And my expectations are great because, as I said, I will not settle till we are the best, we are the brightest, and we are the individuals that, that other states and other countries that people look for guidance. And that is my pledge. I have not come here to, just to idly waste by, because our kids, we cannot afford any wasted time. They have no reset when they step into our schools. And so it is my pledge to make sure that we will provide them with the very best education possible. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll take what I can. Okay?
Two things you mentioned I wanted to follow up on. You said you were calling on members of the General Assembly to diminish the testing burden.
Yes.
Exactly what are you looking for from them?
Well, I think one of the things we looked at, of course, with the testing, we have, right now our teachers are 50% of the testing, as far as their accountability. And I think during the campaign itself, I called for a reduction with that. And I think we have to look at that model. 50%, it's a pretty high standard. I'm not sure that, with all the, measurements we look at within the components themselves, how fair is that? And I think that, I want to look at, seeing is it the best way. When you look at just a test, to say that's 50%, I'm not sure that's quite fair. So we're looking at fairness across that, but that'll be something we have to talk with the legislature with.
And the second part of that, you said you're hoping that state board will take another year. Do you mean to roll out milestones or just the accountability?
Well, I think right now we're looking at the accountability problem. I mean, milestones were out there, but I think looking at the accountability piece, because again, one of the things I found out is that sometimes either through legislation or perhaps, even with the Race to the Top grant, we had a lot of deadlines that were there, and I think we have to be very careful. We have rolled out a lot of things, as I've shared, everything but the kitchen sink that's out there. And we have to make sure that, what is having a positive impact and negative impact. And when you have so many things moving at one time, it's kind of hard to disseminate that. I think it's all right here first, and then we'll go there. Yes.
Yeah, I was curious on your view on the mechanics of the recovery district. I mean, do you think it's a good idea, first off, and second, who do you think should be running it?
Well, as far as looking at the recovery district, I think that first and foremost, my concern is making sure that we do not have any barriers that are preventing our school systems from succeeding. I think it is something that is a regulation. Are we providing them resources? I think we have to look at that, very meticulously to make sure that that is a system there. I mean, we have a system of checks and balances. I think for us at the DOE, looking at our school systems, I would like to say that we're the ones that are monitoring what's going on. And again, as I shared, I think looking at school systems, system by system, we can do a good job with that. And so I'm hoping that's a process we look at. But like I said, with the Louisiana model, and I've heard something of the Tennessee model, I haven't really had a chance to look into that per se. So that'll be just something I have to kind of give you more information.
Would you be looking to be superintendent of that statewide district and actually running those schools?
Pardon?
Excuse me, are you looking to be superintendent of that statewide district where you actually be running those schools?
I prefer local control. I think that with that the local control is where, for me to sit down and try to micromanage everything, that would be something I would be a little bit hesitant to. But I think that's because from a constitutional standpoint, the Constitution is pretty clear about, local boards and local control, and I do want to respect that. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Going back to the teacher evaluations, what do you think about the merit pay piece? That is the eventual idea, is to tie it to pay.
Concerned, and again, concerned on several ways. I think that you look at National Board Certified, which was a way in which that was stripped away from those teachers. So, and that was a very small percent of teachers. Looking at with AYP, I think that for myself, and again, I'll show you at Irwin County, that we made AYP at their elementary school year in and year out. And we started by receiving money that was given to our school, okay, not individual teacher. Well, by the time that I left, we basically got a certificate that said we got it, we made AYP. Well, I can tell you, certificates don't buy a lot of groceries, okay? So I think that, that's something I'm very concerned with. You're looking at the financial aspect of it. Can we fully fund it? And what I've seen in the past, I have concerns there. Okay, I think we saw one back in the back, and then we'll move up. Okay.
I've got just one clarifying question. When you were talking about asking for the state for an extra year, you mean so that students wouldn't be held back based on test scores? Is that right?
Yeah, I think that it really with that, because we have no idea about the test itself. And I think that, it's, to be fair and fairness to them, to make sure that we have all the standards and the metrics measured right, we need to make sure we roll it out very meticulously, because we do not want to penalize a child for something that is really unknown at this time.
Okay, and then on Common Core, I'm trying to decode your
Sure.
comments a little
Okay,
bit.
all right, sure.
I know you've been on the record saying your feelings about it, but it sounds like what you were saying based on today's comments is that it's not an issue that you're going to push or really pursue or really, I don't fight back on. It's too strong a way of characterizing it. What are your plans related to Common Core? Are you still going to try to stop the rollout, or do you feel like at this point the train is on the station and you're just going to, kind of carry it out?
Well, in two areas, again, as I said, now, as far as Common Core standards themselves, they are rolled out completely now in English language arts and math. Okay. Again, looking at that, I think with social studies and science, Again, as I shared just briefly, that will be something we will control in Georgia. Now, and again, looking at that, looking at the next one, again, going back, I think, to Mr. Royal, I mean, we're not gauged or not locked ourselves in by a certain percentage, such as the 15%. And I appreciate that. I think that's a very wise statement, and, it offers us some flexibility. And so I think that we're looking at the standards right now. We're looking at the revision. Again, at some point in time, I will have my time to make my recommendation. And so I think I'll, without going into the details, that'll be the time which I'll have more. But standards are an ongoing issue. They're not something that I think we've agreed with, that we will have to continuously look at them, refine them to make sure we have the best. I mean, in some of the things I've looked at, I think some of the standards, especially in the early K-5 areas, I'm concerned about age appropriateness. And I think we really have to look at that, are they age appropriate for our children? If you were to really dig down into it, and some of the preliminary stuff I've looked at, digging out Bloom's taxonomy, I'm not sure that they're really age appropriate for some of the kids, using some of the terminology that's there. So it'll be an ongoing dialogue, but one thing I will say this, and I think that was reiterated, Georgia will control its education system. I will not surrender that to any outside entity. I will not surrender that to the federal government, because that, from a constitutional standpoint, we're the ones that are obligated to do that. The federal government does not have and should not, control that, because that is a constitutional power. They are not given based on the 9th and 10th Amendment. And specifically in Georgia, our 8th Amendment within our Constitution is very clear that Georgia, and more importantly, the local systems control education. And that's my commitment. Okay, I think we have here, and then we'll go over here. Yes, sir.
In your view, is Georgia spending enough on education?
I think that's one of the things I want to look at. I think that looking at, are we correctly prioritizing the education? I think before we look at asking for more money, one of the things I've called for and we'll be looking at is that we will do an audit of the department itself. We will look and see where we're spending money and allocating money, and looking at those resources. Are they where we need? Again, I think that for myself, I'm very strong at K-5, and my concern is that has to be a priority. So I think once we look at that, then we see what other options are there. I think following up on the campaign, I called for a purchasing consortium. I think adding some big business practices where school systems are allowed to maybe pool their resources in purchasing would be a wise step forward. And so I think we'll look at that, but those will be some things we'll look at during this first year. Yes, ma'am.
The last two superintendents for education have been known more really for things outside education and less for the legacy they left behind. How are you going to change that, and how are you going to focus on education again? The track record has been great.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say this: I'm not running for governor. Okay, so that will I'll give you that pledge. All right. So that'll be day one. But I think that for me, I've been an educator for over 22 years. I work with kids. I work with our children. Whether it's Sunday school class since I've graduated high school. And I've come in here, and it is my, this is the only job that I've looked for. I ran for this position, 4 years ago. I've committed to be here until the job is done. And again, I think I'm hiring some good staff. We are focused. And what you will see is that during the communication period, the only thing you will hear me talk about are kids, teachers, classroom, education. And that's it. And if I am talking about something else, then you need to knock me upside the head, okay? And get my sense, back into me. But this is the only job I'm here for. I'm just a guy trying to do the right thing. And again, I'm just a teacher with, who has a passion for kids and education. Okay. Yes.
How do you feel about the idea that this job should be abolished? Various legislators.
Well, I believe in the representative form of government. I like that. I like my job. Okay. So that is not something, as far as an appointed position, I oppose that. But I think that's, just because I think if you reduce liberty, then perhaps, we're not as great a society as we could be. And so I think that the less appointments we have, the better off we are, because you as the people of Georgia have a voice. And I want to make sure you always have a voice at the table when it comes to education. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
course, that topic, Nancy could ask that again later on when we get into the look at under the gold dome in our last session. Well, we've heard a lot about assessments. The top 10 issues are not written in a hierarchy order, but number 2 happens to be assessing how much is too much. And also to talk about what the new Georgia milestones, we have Dr. Melissa Fincher here to help us with that conversation. So here she comes. Let's get into some more of that conversation about the importance of assessments.
Good afternoon. So Georgia has a long, illustrious history with assessment, not always positive. We are trying to turn the page. We're trying very hard to turn the page on assessment in Georgia and launching Georgia Milestones. Today actually is the last day of our winter window for the end of course measures, which have been administered in those high schools on block schedule. To date, we've administered 130,000 tests online. Don't know how many tests paper and pencil because they're still coming in. So Georgia Milestones has launched. It's been relatively smooth, but of course the major launch will be this spring as our elementary, middle, and all high schools come on board with Georgia Milestones. If I had 3 words to describe what we're trying to accomplish with this new assessment system, and that word assessment system was chosen quite deliberately, it would be comprehensive, cohesive, and consolidated. We've worked very hard to make sure that we have a single assessment system rather than a series of individual tests. What we've had previously has been a number of tests, and Georgia is what I call a test-happy state. We administer quite a few tests. They're individual tests. They don't always necessarily communicate with each other, nor did they necessarily always send the same signal of student achievement. We're working hard to have one comprehensive assessment program across all levels of education so that we can have that coherent message. That coherent message. We need consistent expectations and challenge to make sure that our students are positioned to do well both internationally and nationally. We are in a global economy. We need that consistent signal of how well a student's prepared to proceed to the next level of their educational endeavor, or as they exit school if they're ready for that next step in college or career. And to that end, we're not building this assessment system by ourselves. We're involving the university system, the technical system, and we're involving business and industry representatives in helping us. Recently, we had a conversation about what it means to be career ready. Much of the nation has done a good job of defining what it means to be college ready, but not necessarily what it means to be career ready. All students will not go to college. Many students will go directly into the workforce. What knowledge and skills must they have to be successful to enter into those entry-level positions and have a bright future and a sustainable future with lots of opportunity? We also have to make sure that the signals and the information that we're providing about how our students are doing is consistent with external measures of how Georgia students are doing. And that's something we've not done well with our former assessment programs. Georgia has the very dubious distinction of having the lowest achievement expectations in the nation. When you look at the signal of how Georgia students are doing on our state measures, such as the CRCT, and how they're doing on other national measures, such as the National Assessment of Educational Progress, we have the widest gap. We've got to address that. Now, while we have the lowest expectations in what it means to classify a student as proficient, we do not have the lowest performing students. And that's a very important distinction. Georgia has students who are well positioned to succeed and compete with their peers, but we need to do more. We need to make sure that we're sending more consistent signals. So that's going to be a major emphasis of this new assessment system. And then the last thing, but not the least thing, is to consolidate. Again, I mentioned the fact that we test so much. One of the things that we've worked to do is to eliminate assessments. We now have, whereas formerly under CRCT we had a separate reading and a separate English language arts assessment, We had also separate writing assessments. We've now consolidated reading, language, and writing into a single assessment. So we've eliminated 4 writing assessments that were administered in grades 3, 8, and 11. We've administered 6 language arts assessments. We are in the process of eliminating the high school graduation test. Students now take only the end of course measures, and they don't have to take the additional high school graduation test. So in building this system, we have end of grade measures that will take place at the end of grades 3 through 8. But as Mr. Woods said earlier, we have to make sure that this assessment is not simply an autopsy. Here's how you are. We've got to have formative measures throughout the school year so that teachers know how students are matriculating, what they're struggling with, what they need additional support with, and where they can be challenged, where they're exceeding and perhaps they need additional challenges. At the high school, we have end of course measures and the 8 courses identified by the state board. All of these courses, with the exception of physical science, are required for students to earn a high school diploma. With physical science, students can take either physics or physical science. So those students who take physics do not necessarily take an end of course test. What are the unique features of Georgia Milestones? This is huge for our state, the inclusion of constructed response items. It is very important that students have the opportunity to show what they know and how they know it, and we have historically been a multiple choice only state. Our students are struggling with this. This is probably the heaviest lift with this new assessment system. Now, right now we're including open-ended items in which students construct their own response to the question in language arts and mathematics. We hope in the future to expand and include open-ended items in science and social studies. We will have writing, a measure of writing as part of the English language arts test at every grade level. That's going to be critical. Previously, we had it at key grade levels. Now we have writing, and students will have multiple opportunities on this assessment to express themselves. And it's to express themselves in response to texts they have read. So again, it's more integrated. Another unique feature with Georgia Milestones is the inclusion of norm reference tests. We need to know how our students are doing relative to their peers nationally. Now, we're not going to be administering a intact norm reference test itself, but we are taking a representative sample of items and embedding them on the test so that we can provide parents and students, as well as educators, as well as the public, a barometer of how our students are achieving relative to their peers across the nation. And then we need to accelerate the transition to online administration. This is the 21st century. And we need to open up the opportunity for what we call technology-enhanced items, where the students can show what they know by interacting with the computer in unique ways. So there are new item types that are being developed that expand the information we're able to glean about student achievement. Now, we will begin to embed those types of items in 16-17, and I have a couple of examples that I'll show you in just a minute. So let's talk about this idea of the blended approach, criterion referenced and norm referenced. The test is primarily a criterion reference test. It's critical that we know how Georgia students are doing relative to the state content standards that are used as the basis of instruction every day. It is the criterion referenced proficiency designation that will be issued, that will be used as part of TEKS and LEAKS, because if we're going to hold educators accountable for teaching the state content standards, that is what we must use in the measure for that accountability. But we need to subsidize or supplement that information with how well students are doing relative to their peers. So the norm referenced information is there to augment the criterion referenced. The CRCT, the EOCT are no more. I jokingly say they're not buried 6 feet under. The CRCT particularly is buried 12 feet under. We really need to turn the page with that, and we're doing so. Again, I've mentioned the fact that it's very important that we understand we're not administering a norm reference test. We're just augmenting. And other states have done this before. This is not unique to Georgia. So let's talk about the types of items. Selected response is just a fancy way of saying multiple choice item. Multiple choice items are not going away. Multiple choice items can do a good job of gleaning high quality information from students. Unfortunately, they can have unintended effects of limiting instruction and limiting opportunities for students to demonstrate the depth of their knowledge or to show their knowledge in unique ways. So all content areas, language arts, math, science, and social studies, will continue to have selected response. In ELA, we'll begin to migrate towards evidence-based items where students must not only state what is the main idea, but what evidence from the passage demonstrates the main idea. So you're going a little bit deeper there. Constructed response in language arts and mathematics, extended response, and then the technology enhanced. Constructed response, I hope you know, is when students have to construct their answer as opposed to select their answer. And extended response is when students must provide more detail in their answer. So maybe they're not just citing one or two pieces of evidence, but go more in detail. For the first time, we'll be able to give partial credit to students, whereas multiple choice, you're either right or wrong. With open-ended items, we can give credit if the students show some understanding, and that is a benefit as well. What is also unique is that with these types of items is that students can approach the problem from a multitude of ways and arrive at the correct answer, but there's really one correct answer. So let's look at the types of answers and let's talk about, or questions, excuse me, and let's talk about how these are slightly different from what's come before. So the first type of answer that I'll show you, and these items are just illustrative only. They're not necessarily the best items in the world, but they're items that we can show you. This is a typical multiple choice item, and this would be typical of what we had before in mathematics, which fraction is the greatest. The student will take it on the computer and show it. But you see how this is in isolation. This is not situated. This is mathematics in isolation. As we move into the new assessment, we're going to try to include more real-life problems. So here we have a constructed response item. George and Anna each had a 12-inch pizza. Both pieces were split into 8 equal pieces. Each shaded piece, the shaded pieces are the portion of their pieces that George and Anna ate. Express in fractions how much pizza George and Anna ate, and then use the symbol to show who ate more pizza. Now here's where the students are constructing the answer. And for a technology enhanced item, they might be able to click and drag and pull that in, but I'll show you one in a minute that goes a little bit further. So again, taking George and Anna a little bit further, we have that they each, George had a 12-inch pizza, Anne had a 9-inch pizza. They both ate 1/2. Who ate more? George says he ate more. Explain why or why not. And so the student again constructs his answer. And then down below you see that we're bringing in Carlos. Carlos also had a 12-inch pizza, but he ate a 4th. Did George or Carlos eat more? So it's not only what is the answer, but why. How do you know? Explain. These are 3rd grade items, by the way. Now here's an example of a technology enhanced item, and this is an elementary type of enhanced items. There's so much more that the computer can do. But again, we're back to George and Anna having a 12-inch pizza. George ate 5/8, Anna ate 3/8. We're asking the student to shade in the amount of pizza each student ate. And so the student can click on the slices of pizza to shade them in, to indicate. And then we're asking the students to use the symbols to show who ate more pizza. So again, a lot more interactive for students. Students are more engaged. They like these types of items much more than the traditional multiple choice. So those are some math examples. Let's take a look at a couple of writing examples that students might see. These are narrative writings. Every student on the assessment will have 2 opportunities to write the ELA assessment. One will be a narrative assessment in response to a passage that they've read or a set of passages that they've read. Here the students read a story. This is a middle school item. They read a story about a student visiting his grandparents' house, and there's a big rock boulder next to the driveway that they always played on with his little brother. And the student reads the story and is asked to write a conclusion to the story told from the narrator's point of view 20 years later. Your narrative should describe the narrator's conclusions about the childhood experiences with Mountain Rock, but from the perspective of an adult. And they're told to use details from the story to support their evidence, or to support their answer, so they have to cite evidence, and then answer with complete sentences and use correct punctuation and grammar. So that's very different than an extemporaneous writing prompt, and there's a lot of cognitive effort going on there, coming at it from a different perspective. Now we're 20 years down the road, and the student has to think looking back. You'll get at reading comprehension, because one of the aspects of the story is it's been several years since the boy has been to his grandparents' house, and when he gets out of the car, he's very surprised at how much smaller the rock is than he remembers. So this is part of what we're getting with reading comprehension as well. In high school, another example of narrative writing. The story was written from third-person point of view. How would the excerpt be different if Ralph were narrating? Rewrite the beginning of the story from now Ralph's perspective. So again, we're asking the student has to show an understanding of Ralph's character's motivations, his attributes, what his perspective is, and then rewrite the beginning of the story from that aspect. So that's narrative writing that will occur on the test. In addition to that, students will be asked to write an essay in one of 2 genres, in response to 2 paired passages. So students will read a paired passage, and in elementary they'll be asked to write either an opinion essay or an informative explanatory essay. And it's luck of the draw, much like our former writing assessment. All these genres are part of our curriculum standards and expectations at each grade level. So whereas I might have opinion, another student sitting next to me may have the information or explanatory prompt. At the middle school and high school, they'll have argumentative or informational explanatory. So they'll need to be prepared to write for a specific purpose, and they're given that purpose in the prompt. So again, 2 types of writing will occur. Let's talk about the guiding principles. Much has been said today. I wasn't able to be here the full day, but about the influence that assessment has on what goes on in instruction daily, and that's an undue and very unfortunate influence. But assessment is a very important aspect of our educational system. We want to make sure as we implement this new assessment system that we get it right, and that certainly is what I heard Superintendent-elect Wood say. We need to get it right. We also need to take this opportunity to rebalance our expectations and understand that assessment and accountability provide or play a supporting role in education and are not the sum total of education. Too much emphasis is placed on the test and not on the knowledge and skills that students need to be successful as they progress through the educational system and exit. So we've got to make sure that this assessment addresses some of the challenges that we've had and some of the deficits in our former assessment programs. It must be sufficiently challenging to make sure our students are positioned to compete with their peers. It has to be very intentionally designed across grade levels and courses to send that signal. That's going to be more critically important than ever before with the educator effectiveness measures. It has to be accessible to all students. Students come in a variety of, with a variety of skills and strengths and weaknesses, and we have some students who truly struggle. It's not that they don't know, but they struggle to show what they know and what they have learned. So we've got to make sure that the assessment's accessible to them and that they have that opportunity. We have to make sure that the assessment is built to support the effectiveness measures that are being put in place, that is it instructionally sensitive, so it picks up on quality instruction. And then again, we need to make sure that we transition to online so that we can pick up additional information about student and knowledge and skills in unique ways. That's a tall order. Assessment is asked to do a lot in many states. It's asked to do a lot in the state of Georgia. I will guarantee you that we will not achieve world peace with this assessment system. It's not going to cure all of our ills with the educational system, but it should give us a barometer, and if it does its job well, it should give us a better roadmap than we've had with the former assessment programs we've had. So with that, I will take questions. Yes?
Melissa, can you talk a little bit about how the tests will be scored? Because if they're not all multiple choice, they don't go through the machine, right?
Correct. So they're still scanned, but we will have human scores for those open-ended items. Georgia teachers will be involved in a process we call range finding. And that's when you're looking at how students responded to an item regarding and looking at the rubric, and you're really setting the parameters for each score point on the rubric, and you're talking about what makes this a 2 instead of a 3, and setting those parameters of each score point. It's very critical that we have Georgia teachers at the table to set those parameters to make sure that this test reflects their expectations. So they'll be involved in the range finding process. The range finding papers then are used to train the scorers. CTB, who's the contractor, will be scoring. And they will then take those papers, those annotations that are developed, and train scorers. Scorers have to qualify to score. It's not just, hey, do you want a job at the bus stop? They have to have a college education. They have to demonstrate competency in that content area. They have to be trained. They have to qualify. There's testing that goes on to score. And then they have to demonstrate that they can consistently score throughout the scoring period. So they'll be human scored. We're not entering into the field of artificial intelligence. You've likely heard of that, where the computer scores open-ended questions. We're not entering into that at this juncture. Yes, sir.
I've always been curious as to whether it's possible that these type tests can be a substitute for the exams that teachers, make up themselves and give their kids on a regular basis. I mean, is that the end goal that eventually it would be a routine test? So it's not adding to the number of tests they're taking. It's replacing some of the.
I don't think that that's the end goal, because there first of all, you don't want to take away from the professional practice of the teacher. And the teacher needs to be able to craft that assessment to gauge how they're doing. We have provided a bank of formative items that are of this ilk that teachers can elect to use. But these types of assessments are very precise in their development, and they're very expensive. And so I don't think we'd ever get to a place where we replace just end of unit types of assessments that go on. I think we can augment them, but these are summative assessments as opposed to benchmarks, those types of assessments. Yes, sir.
How do you know that your tests measure what you want to be measuring, and how did the CRCTs fail in that?
Okay, well, I think it's a matter of opinion to say that the CRCT failed to measure. It did measure the state content standards that has been independently verified by external reviews of the assessment itself. The process that we use to develop these assessments is content judgment by content experts as well as by teacher experts. So every item that appears on a Georgia test, and it's very important to know that Georgia owns its items and its tests, has been reviewed by Georgia educators at a minimum of 2 times and judged to align that standard. Now, alignment's in the eye of the beholder. The way that I may teach a concept may be different than the way that you teach a concept. And if the item is not assessing exactly as I teach it, I may say it's not as well aligned. Alignment is not always black and white. It's not dichotomous. There are shades of alignment. Where I think the CRCT failed was in setting realistic expectations. And sending a clear signal of how students were progressing. The proficiency cut was not high enough. Really, you needed to get to the exceeds cut to make sure that a student was on track. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to be very careful. Georgia's a very large state. It's intellectually diverse. We have to make sure that we have items that students who are truly struggling can show what they know, and students who are future Rhodes Scholars can show what they know and what they can do. And that's a tall order, and it's very difficult when you have 50 to 60 items. That's a very tall order. But it's a judgmental process, and then it's externally validated by experts.
We have nearly 100,000 kids in Fulton County, so I'm wondering how long is it going to take you to score, especially the open-ended ones. Second of all, I understand that this year's test the scores will be back to November. So how are you going to? That's not going to help a senior who's already graduated.
Correct.
So how are you going to accommodate? Because that is, I believe, 15% of their grade.
It's 20%.
20%, and they won't even know till they're hopefully freshmen in college. So
That won't be the case every year.
So what are you doing for kids this year?
So this year we're taking time very deliberately to score, to set up the parameters for scoring. I talked about the range finding practice, bringing teachers in. They're only available during the summer months. So that will take place this year. We also, because one of the goals of this assessment is to send that message of preparedness, how prepared are you for the next level? We need to look at that relationship from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade.
So how are they going to get that 20% this year?
That's been waived by the state board. I'm sorry. That's what Mr. Woods was talking about when he said student consequences have been waived by the state board for the 14-15 school year.
So there will be no assessment for high school kids this year that matters on their grades?
That impacts their grades, that is correct. They will take it. They are mandated to take it, but it will not impact their grade. That will be a local decision to use something locally or however they want to adjust their local grading policy. Now, in future years, what we're doing is we're taking time this summer to get those scoring protocols set and locked in so that we can score in an expedited fashion in future years, because it does serve as the final exam. Kids can't wait to go on to UGA to find out how they did. It's not relevant anymore. So that's going to have to take place much more quickly. That's one of the beauties of moving online. It's much like an email. A student can hit submit, and that student response can be in front of a trained score in a matter of seconds, just like an email can be received by its recipient in a matter of seconds. So the more we move online, the more expedited we can be. Definitely we won't be reporting in 3 and 5 days like we have with our multiple choice tests. So it will take a little bit longer, but that's something we're going to have to work to expedite. Yes, sir.
With no consequences, is there any fear that the students might not take the test seriously?
We've had a lot of conversations about that, and I don't want to say there's fear. I mean, we've done quite a bit of pilot testing without consequences before, and in general, while now there are some students who will take the day off, so to speak, the vast majority of students do not do that. That will be something that leads to interpretation, knowing that there are no consequences. That was one of the concerns where when we waived the student consequences, but yet it had not been discussed that we would waive the educator consequences. There was concern, well, the students aren't going to be held accountable, but I am as an educator. So that's one of the things that we needed to address, and we have addressed. Yes, ma'am.
Quick basic question. So you were saying that now the ELA exams were merged into one. Is the student going to have a separate score for their writing as opposed to the other areas?
So they'll have an overall language arts score that will have a proficiency designation. And then they will have sub-scores, reading and vocabulary, and writing and language. Yes.
Thank you very much. What a complicated topic. It's interesting that I mentioned that the top 10 are not written in a hierarchical order. What makes all this more challenging is that all these issues are really intertwined. So you heard from Melissa, and you kind of heard from Superintendent Woods, that assessments involved with teacher evaluation, assessments are involved with administrative evaluation, school ratings, and also eventually it's going to be tied into teachers that graduate from universities and then how well those universities are training their future teachers. So it's a very important piece, but it's only one of many of those. Well, if you'd like to stand for just a second, we're moving some chairs around here. We're going to go right into the last session. Now, this last session is one that in your feedback to us, every year you tell us this is one of your favorite sessions. It's a look under the gold dome. The people we brought to you today purposely, when we invite our guests, we know that these three people are both knowledgeable and very candid. We have Representative Stacey Abrams, House Minority Leader, very candid, very knowledgeable about the education issues, and she's spoken many times at our Education Policy Fellows class, and they just love having her there because of that balance of knowledge and candor. Representative Mike Dudgeon, Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. Mike recently served on a panel of ours at our last critical issue forum. You may have attended that. It was over at Gwinnett at their new high school for science and technology. We were focusing on STEM. And Mike O'Sullivan is the state director. We've become close colleagues. Our organizations work a lot together. We do more of that research policy piece. His organization does the policy piece and does a lot of that grassroots area. And Mike has worked well with us. In fact, he and Dana were very instrumental last year in our coalition that we put together to work on the higher standards. So now let's go ahead and kick it off. I'll toss it to Mike so he can moderate our panel.
Well, thank you both for being here today to talk at this ninth annual Media Symposium. Representatives, the governor has indicated that education is at the forefront of his mind. Obviously, he's going to be directing a lot of the priorities that the legislator might be taking up. I'm just kind of curious, and I think we'll start off by asking what do you see on the radar in terms of legislative priorities? What kind of things are you personally looking at, and what do you think is going to be in flux this year?
His radar's better than mine.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. I think what Steve and this group does is a really great partnership and truly with the legislature. And their top 10 issues thing is one thing that I read pretty much cover to cover every year because it is very thoughtful and good research about education. So the governor has two big initiatives for the next 2 years that probably are going to be the dominant things in education. The first is looking at the QBE funding formula. If you all know, the funding formula was written in the 1980s under Joe Frank Harris. It awards pieces of employees like .019 counselor and .13 elementary teacher. It's sort of an employee period-driven formula. The governor believes, and many other people believe, that it's time to rewrite that formula for the 21st century. There's been many attempts in the legislature in the past to try to do that, and none of them have been successful. But the governor, I think, is making this a top priority of his, and he's going to try again to bite at the apple, and I think he's going to have success, and I think now is the time to rewrite that formula. It will hopefully come to a formula that's more student-centric instead of employee-centric, and a priority of mine is that once that money is calculated, I want to make sure our local districts and the locally elected people get the flexibility that they need to implement the stuff. In other words, they don't need to be told you have to have X counselors and Y teachers and Z principals. I think that we elect our local school boards, they know their communities best, and I am hopeful that when the formula comes out of the wash that allows those systems to have flexibility. But in all cases with funding formula, there are winners and losers. I carried a funding bill in 2012 around equalization, and there was a list of winners and a list of losers, and we voted on that bill. I looked at the board, and the green and the red kind of looked like the list of winners and losers. So it will be always challenging to adjust any kind of funding because, again, because of the winners and losers. So that's a big priority on the table. The poster child example for funding is that we don't have any technology component in the current funding formula. It's obviously something that needs to be in there. The second one is going to be, I think, more controversial, which is looking at intervention program for consistently failing school districts. It's been referred to as the Louisiana recovery model. Though there is no bill yet in Georgia, we're not exactly sure what it would look like. But the thesis is this. The thesis is if you have a consistently failing schools or school districts that have not been able to use their local resources and local leadership to get out of the ditch and to provide an adequate schooling for their children, then at some threshold point that the state would be empowered to come in and make leadership and personnel changes in order to hopefully effectuate change at that area. This kind of happened by accident in Louisiana when Katrina wiped out the entire city and also wiped out the public school establishment, and they kind of started over with a different model in Louisiana. And there's a lot of data that suggests that that's done very well for students, though with all data, I've also had some people very passionately argue that it hasn't really made that much of a difference. But the idea, I know the governor is very passionate about that it's just not correct, and the state cannot just stand by if you know that the same schools are failing over and over again and do nothing about it. So there's a lot of details with that. The last I heard, actually, we were going to may look at that this session. If I had to read the tea leaves for y'all, I would guess we were going to look at the recovery model this session and look at the funding in 2016. Getting the funding right is obviously a million levels of details. But we will do, I would be pretty sure we'll do both of those this session. We will also be looking at another controversial subject around the cap on the Georgia scholarship tax credit goal program where the people can give money towards a private school scholarships and get a tax credit. That program sold out to the limit of $58 million on January 1st in a few hours. And so there's a lot of pent-up interest in some members of the General Assembly to raise that cap significantly or maybe offer alternative program for low-income kids. Both of those are kind of on the table. And lastly, before I let Minority Leader go, is an initiative I have around the way we elect our superintendent and state school board, looking at a constitutional amendment that would change it so that the state school superintendent was appointed by the governor instead of elected, and he's an administrative person. He does not set policy. He runs a multi-million-dollar operation. 38 states already appoint that person. I personally think governance-wise that's the right model. And then that the board would be, instead of appointed by the governor, would be elected by the congressional district of the legislature. We do that for the DOT where the congressional districts get together. The people represented a district in the legislature get together and pick someone to be on the state board. I know we're limited on time, so I'm not going to go any further into details, but I know we'll probably have questions and follow-up later.
Minority Leader Abrams, I would love to hear your perspective on what you're seeing.
Sounds like we're going to be busy. I would approach it in the same way. To begin with, I think the funding formula is universally understood to be not the most successful approach to addressing these issues. And I think the challenge is acknowledging that it costs more to educate children in Georgia than it did 30 years ago. We have a very different composition of our student population. It is more expensive to educate a rural child than an urban child. It is more expensive to educate a poor child than a middle-class child. And our funding formula did not acknowledge or anticipate how different our counties and our school districts would be, because we now have school districts that encompass all of those models at the exact same time. And the calibration of delivery of funds that should translate into delivery of services, I don't think has kept pace with the change of the state. And so I'm very eager to understand and participate in the conversation. So I don't think there's any debate that we need to do something different and better. I think the rub will come, what is it we do and how do we do it? I do not accept the axiom that there are winners and losers. Education is too basic and fundamental to the health of the state for us to allow that. Now, there are going to be some who are happier at the end of the day, but
I like that better.
But I think that should be our mission. I think
Yes.
we should think about it in that way, because ultimately, our consumers are children, and there's no do-over with education, and so I think it's critical that we approach it in that way. And so I think we are open to conversations, and we are eager to see what has worked in other states. I think we all have to accept the basic paradigm that we have not put in adequate funding over the last dozen or so years. We've gotten better, but we're not where we need to be. And while there certainly is a lot of conversation about whether more money solves problems, we have to get to the place where that's really the conversation. We're not at the conversation of whether we need more money to solve problems. We need to get to an adequate level of funding so that we can then have the conversation about marginal increase. And I think it is a good sign that the governor is interested in having that conversation over the next couple of years. On the recovery districts, my challenge with that, and again, I have a great deal of respect for Mike, for Representative Dudgeon, and I am taking the things he said and using them against him, but not in any way disrespectful.
That's fine. That's part of the process.
The challenge with the analogy of the school district being stuck in the ditch is if the state is the bulldozer that keeps shoving you back in there each year, you're never going to get out of the ditch. And so as we think about failing schools and failing school districts, what we have to understand is what are the atmospheric and environmental issues that maintain the failure of those school districts. If it is simply inaction by the local government, that is one conversation, and I have been very vocally supportive of the governor when he has had to take over school boards, because I do think there are very clear connections between the activity of elected officials executing their jobs and not. But that should not be a one-to-one correlation to whether or not a poor school district that is told fund 56% of your educational needs on a tax base that does not exist. It is impossible to squeeze blood out of that turnip, and so then to be held accountable for that and be told you failed in your mission when you were not given the tools necessary to accomplish that mission. That's going to be my concern, making certain that we evaluate what caused the problem. If you have environmental issues such as abject poverty or lack of transportation, parents who are working 4 jobs and cannot meet the level of parental engagement necessary to move that child's education forward, the solution is not just change the deck chairs. The solution is figuring out what kind of wraparound services are necessary, and that may not require that the school district be told you have failed. It may require that we double down our investment and help even more than we had. And so any conversation about this, I think, has to look at what is causing the failure, not just it's failed and now we're going to put some new people in there. I grew up in southern Mississippi. I'm very familiar with the New Orleans School District, in part because they were the only debate team that we could debate with because we only had one in the state of Mississippi. So I spent during my sophomore year of high school, every week in New Orleans. I was the designated walker because this is before Louisiana acknowledged that 15-year-olds shouldn't drink. But the reality of what happened for New Orleans, you hadn't, and I think I appreciate your acknowledging that the data shows 2 very different stories. There have been market increases that have happened for some of the kids in the recovery district, and there are others who have not seen any progress. And again, it's because we have to be much more, I think, intentional about digging beneath the top line data. And so any legislative initiative that would fundamentally restructure how we address student achievement and student needs, I think has to be much more complicated and has to have a range of options. I support the idea of local control. I think that's very important, but I think there are baseline and threshold metrics that every school district should be held to, and that the state, if we are going to set those metrics, that we are responsible for funding, which gets us back to the underlying issue of reevaluating our funding strategy. When it comes to the SSOs, I am a strong, vocal, and ardent opponent. We are diverting funds from the public school system to fund private education. I support the right of every parent to place their child in private education, but that is a privilege and you should pay for it. Public funds are for public education, and there's a reason for it. Private schools have the ability, and indeed they are designed to pick their customers. They can decide who they want, they can decide who they don't want, they can decide they made a mistake and kick a child out. The public school district has neither that flexibility, but it also doesn't have that mission. And the diversion of $58 million in less than in a matter of weeks from the public school system is very troubling to me. And the question of expanding that even further, I think, is counterproductive. Every dollar we have should go to fully funding and adequately providing education through the public system. The private system is private for a reason. They have privileges that the public system does not have, and thus they should be responsible for their own funding. The other challenge I have is that there's something a bit disingenuous and contradictory about the need to create the new opportunity scholarship for low-income students, since that was the argument for the creation of the SSOs that we have now. If we didn't create it to help low-income students, which was the argument that was made at the time and it's embedded in the legislation, the fact that we now need to create one for that group suggests that the money we're spending now is not for low-income families. And so if we are diverting funds for middle and upper-income students at this moment to pay for their private education, so much so that we have to create a new scholarship organization, I think that really begs the question of the utility of the initial program and whether or not any of the gains that people are talking about are legitimate and authentic. And I think until we have solved our core responsibility of producing strong public education, it is, I think, a dereliction of our duty to continue to invest those dollars in SSOs. Other than that, I'm open to conversation.
Other than that, on the subject of funding, obviously, a lot of that discussion gets wrapped up in should we be providing more funding towards education. Georgia currently gives more as a percentage of the state budget to education than any other time in our history. There are other funding priorities that are being viewed and taking up: transportation, healthcare, among others. How do those two issues run together, and do you believe that there are additional funding requirements? Do you think that a funding reform, that the first step must be additional funding, or can they be done at separate times?
You want me to
Go ahead.
So you can,
Go ahead.
You deserve a chance to get back at me.
Yes.
I think,
I'll get you in a second.
I think that the challenge with that analysis is that Georgia is, and I haven't seen the tax foundation for this year, but we last year were the lowest per capita spending state in the nation. So to say that it's the largest portion of our budget, I mean, that's a bit disingenuous, because our budget doesn't pay for all the things we should be paying for. We spend less, and thus, yes, it can take up a larger percentage, but if you're only spending $1, 50 cents does look a lot like a lot. But the more we spend and how adequately we invest is important. I think it's also important to understand the composition of the state of Georgia today versus 30 or 40 years ago. We're much more diverse racially, economically, and situationally in terms of the kinds of needs of our students, and we have not kept pace with those changes. And so I do think it's a critical issue for us to acknowledge a baseline failure of funding. That was done under Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. This is not a partisan failure, it is a universal political failure. We have failed to adequately fund our education, and then we spend a great deal of resources on the other end mediating against the consequences of that. And so I think we have to begin with a conversation of funding, because we can't get to the authentic questions on the other side, because we don't know what we're talking about yet. It's a business, it's the moral equivalent, to extend a car analogy, of your car isn't dry, your car won't move, so you go and get new tires, but the problem was you're out of gas. If we don't know what was causing the problem, we can't solve it. And I think we must begin with the fundamental of making sure we have adequate resources, and then we can start to figure out what the other pieces are, but we can't even get to the question because we can't see through the obfuscation of underfunding our education for so many years.
I hear what Stacey's saying, and I agree with some of it. We'll point out that we are lowest per capita in state spending, but we do ask our locals to match a lot for education. Whether that's right or wrong is different, but when you add that together, we're not bottom. We're in the bottom half, but we're not at the bottom. And I believe that, I do believe, especially the past several years, that the education has been underfunded. I was very glad the governor put more money back into QBE this past year with the budget. I hope we can do a little bit of that this year. The challenge is what I call the Medicaid monster and the healthcare monster, is that even if we have revenue growth year over year, we may be pushing $900 million this year in revenue growth. Just the Medicaid enrollment growth, the Medicaid cost structure, and then the state health benefit cost structure, all of you here are getting killed on your health insurance. Well, guess what? The state gets killed too. It makes it a little bit difficult to keep up with that because of these automatic increases eat up most of the revenue. But will say very clearly that I don't believe that we should do something with transportation by taking out of education. I think that would be a terrible mistake. I think we should continue to try to incrementally get more money into education, be top priority. If we do something with transportation, it needs to be new funding, with one exception. it gets more in the transportation and education, but we do the 4 pennies of the gas tax. This 4th penny, the mythical 4th penny, has been supposed to be spent on transportation, is being spent on the general fund. I believe that that's about $180 million, and I believe that that needs to be spent on transportation. But other than that, transportation revenue needs to come from newer sources. And just like Stacey said, we're at the very bottom in spending in per capita transportation as well, even though we're a high growth state, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'm open, even the Republican, to doing some revenue enhancements on for transportation. And I will say I want to protect education with one exception. It's not K-12, but as a strategic sense, I'm a little bit concerned that we might be investing too much money in capital projects for the Board of Regents and the university system, as the university system's kind of capped and falling, a lot more online education there. And if I'm looking at bang for a buck in dollars, maybe take a little bit of that money towards transportation. And although my colleagues have other ideas, diverting a little bit of money, but I would say that I don't want to divert any money out of K-12 towards transportation. I know the minority leader does not want to do that, and hopefully we can keep that as something we agree on.
Very good. In the Georgia Partnerships Top 10, you're welcome, Dan. One of the issues is the governance structure. June 30th of this year is the deadline for all districts to choose. How do you think that process has gone, and is there any legislation that you see coming up this year that would interact with that deadline or with that decision?
Okay. I'll take that first, since I had a bill about that a couple of years ago. House passed a bill in 2013 which would have provided, and only had a handful of no votes, would provided a more nuanced accountability structure, which gave successful schools more flexibility, and then even schools aren't successful, opportunities to get flexibility that were much more, I guess, flexible. It's funny, the state was being more flexible in granting flexibility. That would have solved the problem with the June 30th deadline. If you don't know, on June 30th, if nothing changes, we've had a blanket waiver for the past several years during the economic downturn about the state law, which says those QB dollars, which says you're supposed to have X number of this kind of employee and Y number of that, and also class size restrictions. Those have been waived by a blanket waiver from the state because, frankly, it would have put a lot of the systems out of business. Even still, if June 30th shows up and we technically enforce those restrictions on personnel and on class size, there are many rural districts who literally would have to close the door and go home because it's not possible for them to make those numbers work. They're just not realistic. And as the minority leader pointed out, part of that is because of funding. Their local tax base has been eroded. The state has had a bad budget time as well. So we got to do something about it. I'll just be straight up honest. The House seems to be more open to that. The Senate, for whatever reason, has decided that they really don't want to change things. And so it will be interesting. It's kind of like, what's that game where you play chicken or whatever? I hate that we're doing that. I really wanted the legislature to get clarity to the systems before this year because I don't think it's fair. I'm a former local school board member. It's not fair to them to have to plan on a last minute notice. I'm not sure what we're going to do. I think it might be something. We might extend that deadline a little bit in order, since the governor is going to be coming with a new funding formula, which may have new flexibility along with it. I really don't know. I think, Michael, that is the $6 million question about what we're going to do with that deadline. But we have to do something because it is not fair for the state. In that case, I would agree with the minority leader. If the state kept that thing and we are driving the bulldozer and pushing the ditch, I'll not agree on some other things, but on that one, I think we have to do something about it.
What he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd like to open it up if any of the press has any questions. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about why you favor the appointing of the state superintendent, and also would we need a constitutional amendment to change that? I mean, what would you need in place?
Yes, I'll talk a little bit about that. That's sort of been an effort I've driven, though I have some partners in the Senate. The idea would be, it is a constitutional amendment. The Constitution is the one that says we elect the state school superintendent and we appoint our state board of education. That is Constitution. Any change would be a constitutional amendment. Therefore, usually in the legislature, that means it's a 2-year process. The earliest we could have the people vote on it would be November of 2016. But here's my thinking. Right now, you as a citizen of Georgia, you get to elect your local school board member, you elect your state representative, your state senator, you elect the governor, you elect the lieutenant governor. All 5 of those people have a big say in education policy. We already elect a lot of people, and the legislature sets the high-level policy, and then the state board right now implements that policy by making the detailed policy decisions that need to happen. Your state superintendent runs the State Department of Education, which is the single largest spender of money of any department in the thing. It's a multi-million-dollar operation, hundreds of employees. And I believe that that's more of an administrative leadership function. It's not really a policy function. So generally, you don't elect people to be administrators. You elect policy people. And so I believe that the governor should be able to appoint the person to run the Department of Education, just like he appoints the Department of Revenue. Think about it at the federal level. We don't elect the Secretary of Education. We don't elect the Secretary of Defense. We elect the president and ask him to put in his team in order to get things done. 38 states do the appointment method, and I think that will be better to get just in general a pool of candidates who are going to have a chance to do better and have better leadership alignment. The model looking at the state board is right now that is changing that from the governor appointment where the legislature would appoint the board or elect the board by congressional district. We do this for the Department of Transportation. So the members of different congressional delegation would come together in caucus and elect a state board member. One thing I want to make sure if we do that, though, is that there's an open process where we can get applications and get suggestions from the local school board superintendents and from the education experts in that congressional district. I don't want it just to be the legislators picking their friend or whatever. I really want it to be a mini little election, like almost like an Iowa caucus type of thing where you have candidates who sell themselves to the legislative delegation. An interesting side effect from our minority leader, and we discussed this the other day, is that right now, because the governor picks the whole state board, it generally is a uniparty type thing. If we get elected by congressional district, we'd have folks from both parties on the school board, and I believe that if done right, a lot of education, if not most of it, should be a nonpartisan issue, and so I think that would be a thing. But in summary, the idea is that you line up the state board to be policy. When the legislature is setting policy, that lines up the school board with the policymakers. Your state superintendent is running things and doing leadership. That's the governor. You line them up with that person. I will say there's a million details in this, and there's a lot of discussions, and it's not going to be a quick thing. And I realize there is a lot of healthy debate on this, and like I said, it's probably going to be a 2-year process, and I look forward to it.
And can I get comment from Representative Abrams also about what you think about it?
Representative Dudgeon has done, I think, a lot of thoughtful work on this, and I wouldn't say I'm completely persuaded, but I think it's worthy of consideration, and we look forward to working with him on it.
What makes you comfortable about it?
Devil lies in the details, and making sure we understand how that works.
And frankly, I want to hear from more of the education community, and I mean, I've talked to several leaders, but I really honestly want to hear from people about what they think about it, the experts in the field.
I'm curious about your views on Common Core, or actually, I think I may know your views, but on the issue of Common Core, I mean, do you expect that it's through and the legislature had its say and it's done, or do you expect it to keep coming back up?
Do you want me to take this one for you?
I've already taken a lot of bullets in this, but why don't you take it first and I'll take it then.
I'm bulletproof on this one. I mean, I think there will continue to be concerns from members of the legislature about Common Core. I think they are not valid when given the careful consideration that's been given to it over the course of this year. I am very supportive of Common Core, and I think that no matter what is introduced, and we all have the ability to introduce anything we want, I don't see it gaining much traction.
Yes, I wrote a column right after the session about Common Core because I split it into two things. There's Common Core, the standards that Georgia has, and there's Common Core, the idea of a lot of federal control. And I don't like a lot of federal control. I like keeping state control. I agree on that thing. I don't have, and I always said, don't have a major problem with the current standards. I think the review process that our friends at State Board have been doing has been very thorough. They've got hundreds of different changes. The idea that Georgia can't change their standards is already being debunked. But I also, though, very strongly believe that we want to keep the federal government from morphing over time and to be the person who de facto sets what we're always doing in Georgia. But I will agree with the minority leader. I know the legislature has a tendency to get fatigue on an issue, and we battled this one to the death last year. And generally, the legislature doesn't like to go back at the well, back to another bite at the apple that quickly. So I would be very surprised if there was any action in 2015.
I know I got full county board of ed, and I think for the last several years, I remember when legislative priority is local control. And so, you know, you say at the table that you want to keep feds out of the state. Well, the locals are saying the same thing about the
Absolutely.
legislature. So how much do you support local control, and how much are you going to allow school boards full of charter districts? So we have a lot of flexibility, but there are some things that we can't get done. Dual testing for math standards, going off on our own, those kinds of things. So just a comment on that. It's more of a comment, not really a question, but you're saying the same thing about the Fed, but they're saying the same thing about the gold dome.
I totally understand, and as a local school board member in Forsyth County and a delegation member in Fulton County, I understand what's going on there. I will say that we're doing better. I know that Chairman Tippins and Chairman Coleman have reduced the volume of bills considerably over the past few years of sort of, a lot of legislatures do have their pet ideas, and we know this with legislation. Oh, I think the legislature should do this, and we have reduced the volume of that. I think getting more flexibility back to locals on funding and things like that is a great idea. I've been supportive of Fulton on the math issue. We're trying. Are we doing the best job? Probably not, but I think we're trying to move in that direction. At least I am.
Now, those 38 states that appoint the school superintendent, is that always the governor? Does the school board ever?
Now, there's a mix of appointing bodies. Sometimes it's the state board itself who appoints it, which is more similar to how, obviously, locals operate. How locals operate. I mean, in Georgia, the locals appoint their superintendent. The local boards do.
But that won't fly here. What's going to go forward here is the governor appointment?
Probably, again, like I said, as Reverend really said, the devil's in the details. A lot of different opinions on this. The best I can tell from talking to a lot of different key leaders in the state about this, the recipe that I think needs to start with is the governor with the superintendent and the legislature with the board. That's what I'm starting with. But as somebody has said yesterday in another forum I was at, if you can predict what the legislature is going to do next week, I'm going to predict the stock market a year from now. So,
Are you going to file legislation? Are you going to file?
Absolutely. I'll be filing the next couple weeks. Okay. Yep.
Any thoughts on the current teacher evaluation regime, and should we expect any tweaks, changes?
You want to go for that? Yeah. I chaired the subcommittee meeting where we had the original bill on the TEKS and leaks, the teacher evaluation system. We had like 10 different systems come in and all praise it, and no one testified against it. And so it literally sailed through the legislature because I think everyone knew that the old system wasn't very good. You had 99.5% of teachers getting a pass and 0.5% getting fail, and everybody kind of instinctively knew that wasn't a good system. But what we found is always unintended consequences, and I think why those first 10 systems were so excited is because they all had race to the top money in order to make it happen. And so they were able to hire extra people, extra staff, extra people to work on these complicated evaluations and developing the SLOs and all those things. And so now that everyone's having to do it with literally just without additional funding, now you have a lot of pushback, and I really don't blame them. I'm not sure. I know that the state board knows about this and the State Department knows about this, and I think there's a general will to do something about this, but part of it, though, is under the Race to the Top grant and under the federal guidelines, you know, that having that kind of evaluation is a federal priority to them. And so we don't have full control in Georgia about what we do with that because the U.S. Department of Education will want to sign off on any changes we make to that system. And so, but I do believe that trying to do things too fast, and I've heard over and over again, our teachers in the state are frenzied is the word I'm trying to think of. And really just kind of under a lot of stress. And so I'm okay with slowing it down. However, I do believe very strongly that moving to a system like that, which is a better evaluation system, is good for Georgia.
And I agree about the goal,
Yeah.
but I think it goes back to my concern about recovery districts and formularies. We have to provide the resources to make all of our solutions have preceded actual resources to make those solutions possible. And then we hold accountable those school districts who fail to meet the metrics we've set. And I think we have to reverse that approach immediately if we want to see the sustainable and substantive change that we keep asking for from our school districts.
So you're saying it's unfair to judge teachers in the way that we are without fully funding?
I think if you're going to ask someone to do something, you've got to make it possible for them to do it.
In the essence of time, let's wrap this up. Let's thank our panel members for being with us. Thank you, representatives, and thank you, Michael, for moderating the panel. Representative Abrams was kind enough to squeeze this into her busy schedule this afternoon, but she's going to have to hustle out. Representative Dudgeon can stay here for a few minutes and answer some more questions. Let me give you just a few announcements before we break. When I said earlier that we base a lot of this on your feedback, your evaluation, that's this yellow form. So please give us your feedback. This was the 9th Media Symposium and the 11th top 10 issues. And then when we get to the 10th forum, Media Symposium, we'd like for you to have your feedback and help us make it just a little bit better. We said earlier, we talked about resources a lot, both written, a lot of information on our website. Bill Maddox will send you an email next week about when this will be videotaped. It'll be on our website, it is videotaped, when it'll be on our website. And you can go there and refer some of your colleagues who were not able to be here today that they could see this in its entirety. We mentioned now you can get a couple copies of this, hard copies if you'd like. If you email us, particularly Alice Ford, we'd be glad to send you at least 2 copies of this in the future. Question over here at the end about the complication of appointed school boards and all that. The number 4 item is about appointed elected, and Dana has a pretty detailed graphic there about all the complications of how some of them are appointed or elected or whatever. So it'll kind of help you wade through that. Number 4. All right, thank you very much for being here. We hope to see you again next year. Use us in the meantime as a resource.